Hey guys, welcome back for another episode of AI news, drama, and updates. And looks like quite a lot happened this week, starting with a massive explosion at the Pentagon, apparently. You might not have heard about this at all, but on Monday there was an account called Bloomberg Feed. It's a verified Twitter account, and it posted a picture of an explosion near the White House. On closer examination, they determined it's a stable diffusion generated AI graphic. But of course, multiple news sources were quick to just jump on the fact that it was a picture that could have gotten them clicks. So they ran with it as if it was a real story, creating a lot of confusion in the process. But this does give us a little bit of a preview of what's to come. And it's obvious to me, at least, that media of any size, big, small, they're all going to have to be a little bit more careful with what they put together or what they choose to believe. I mean, it was already far too easy to just misreport things or just talk about things as if they were true when they were really just an opinion. Being able to generate entire pictures or videos of things that never happened is going to add a new layer. But it's not all bad news in the world of AI art, and here was something that I did come across that I thought was pretty cool. A developer called Luden.io, they put a web-based game together, and in this game, every aspect of it is designed by a different portion of a machine learning. I'm also looking at the fact that the developers put together a project where the idea was to do kind of as little work as possible themselves, assembling something just based on neural network, which is in itself very interesting. So you got both Stable Diffusion and Midjourney for graphics. It looks like GPT was involved for dialogue and things like that. And they did AI generated music as well. I can't really speak on the gameplay of it. I haven't played it myself, but I'll definitely link it in the description below if you want to check it out. Also on the topic of art, we've talked about Adobe Firefly. We talked about how Google Bard is going to be integrating that, but it's also integrated directly into Photoshop now. So digital artists are able to use generative fill. And this is, to my knowledge, the easiest way that digital artists who have been maybe apprehensive about AI are now actually seeing it directly installed into their program without any additional steps, any additional plugins, or anything like that being required. Now, this is just a beta version for now, but you can already see how powerful this is going to be. Through the advent of plugins and third-party installs, we've been able to do this already for a couple of months, but this is an official installation, and I see this as just making it a lot more accessible for digital artists. While the world of AI art in still photographs is reaching a point where from version to version we're not seeing as big of a jump anymore because things are generally getting more and more photorealistic, models being put together for text to video type of applications, as we've seen here, haven't really been at that juncture just yet. Things that we've seen recently, even like the beer commercial, they look like an acid fever dream, and I'm actually okay with that. But as you can imagine, this is certainly the next stage of this technology, and a lot of companies, including NVIDIA, are working on text-to-video diffusion models. So I wanted to show you here an example of Pyoko, and this seems to be the one that NVIDIA is working on. And in terms of examples, in terms of the types of video models that we've seen, I suppose this is a step in the right direction. They have this, I don't even have an adjective for what the quality of this is, but then there's some that look, this food picture, for example, it's harder to tell that this is the same type of technology that created something like this. So while we're still not there yet, it doesn't look like we're that far away from something that's a little bit closer to what you might imagine text to video is eventually going to be. And I don't know if NVIDIA's easy access to the hardware gives them a bit of an edge, but it does seem like they're moving very, very quickly, not just to compete, but even to overtake companies like Runway eventually. So we're certainly going to keep an eye on this tech as it moves. But as we talk about the future, as we think about the future, we got a quote from Mr. Bill Gates himself. And in what is potentially some billionaire on billionaire ribbing, the way he talks about and thinks about AI will be the end of companies like Amazon and Google. Well, as far as their generative search goes. But Gates's hypothesis is whoever comes out with the biggest, best chatbot, the thing that everybody loves and the thing that everybody gloms onto, that's going to be the next Google, essentially, the next big search. You know, once you get to the point where you have your own personal Jarvis at home and you're just able to talk back and forth with an AI in your own home. I guess in that reality, sure, there wouldn't be a reason to search around or browse. You could just simply ask your AI what you need or what your inventory looks like. And while that sounds sci-fi, we're actually not that far off from that level of technology, even now. So I can see that. In some ways, I feel the same way, and I've said across multiple videos that I do think generative search is going to replace the traditional search that we have had in the past. We're already seeing evidence of that. And so Ars Technica picked this up. It looks like it started on mobile, but it's moved on to desktop now, where you're seeing generative search results, something like GPT, and something similar to what Bing has been doing actually for a little bit now. We're starting to see that now in Google searching. Now, the data here is probably not coming from GPT or anything related to that. Obviously, this would be Palm 2. This would probably be related to Bard. And in that regard, any images would be Adobe Firefly copyright-free images. Google made a public commitment to put AI in everything. They've already upgraded their Palm 2 model, and they're going to be fighting to stay relevant in this space anymore. And so I want to briefly talk about WorldCoin, which, to be honest, I haven't personally formed much of an opinion on myself. I'm very curious what you guys have to think about this one. But there's some people, depending on how they look at AI in the future and how things are going, Sam Altman being one of them, where they think that something like this is necessary, where you have to scan biometric authentication. You'll have to prove that you're an actual human. CAPTCHA is already kind of a dead technology. With machine learning being at the level that it is right now, it's smarter than most people. So it's going to be able to answer the traffic lights questions and all that other goofy stuff that we've been going through for years. You used to get the question of, are you a robot, because you used to be smarter than the computer. And now that's not necessarily the case. So how do you prove to the computer that you are indeed a human and not a bot who's just answering the questions correctly? And that's where something like this comes in. So you got this orb and it scans your eyeball, and that is biometric authentication. Is it mixing a lot of technologies together that are questionable and that border on privacy and hot button issues like cryptocurrency and biometrics? Yep. So that's why this is going to be a really just hot button type topic, I think, for a lot of people. But again, what are your thoughts on how do we get away from the idea that computers and humans are not going to be that different to a computer who's asking anymore? Do you have any ideas for how you could yourself prove to a computer that you're you? I mean, aside from sticking your eyeball in it? So hopefully I'll see some comments about that one. But the last thing I want to talk about in terms of the future is just Meta releasing another open source project. From what I understand, this is a model that can recognize language and it can actually spit languages back out. So it's a translator type of program. And ironically, even though there's 4,000 plus languages in something like this isn't called a large language model. They call something like this an MMS, a massively multilingual speech model. To put something like this together, Meta was actually really clever. They used Bible translations. Because the Bible is one of the top selling books and there's so many different forms of audio, so many different languages, and so many different translations, working backwards from that data made it easier to create something of this immense scale. It was surprising to read in the article, and I guess it's really just because I hadn't thought about it, but there's 100 or fewer languages that are commonly supported by big tech. So something like this aims to help with something like that. They said, we envision a world where technology has the opposite effect, encouraging people to keep their languages alive, since they can access information and use technology by speaking in their preferred language. I want to try not to interject too much of my opinion here, and to be honest, there's a lot that I don't know when it comes to the regulations that are going to happen in the future with the White House, with the EU, and with a lot of the different countries that are out there. So much of this borderlines on politics or just capital interests, it's really hard to see where this is all going. But the White House has got the blueprint for the AI Bill of Rights. They've got a risk management framework. Last week, we talked about how Congress had Sam Altman and a lot of big talking heads in the AI industry talking about the dangers of AI and what the future of regulation should look like and what some of those ideas would be. We already talked about DEF CON, which is going to be where a lot of these companies are put to the test and a lot of the privacy concerns are addressed. Now, despite the fact that public opinion has already been heavily influenced by media, by a lot of CEOs, by a lot of these interests, the government is asking for public opinions. Links, of course, are in the description, but we've got until 5 p.m. on July 7th. It looks like they're inviting people to participate in a prompt of 30 questions, kind of a suggestion box type of thing from what it sounds like, where you can talk about your fears or the future of AI. I'm not sure how much opinions will be taken into consideration or what is going to be done with that. But all this is going on while, and I'm surprised to be saying this, but one of the largest leaders in the industry is calling for more regulation, which is Sam Altman. Sam thinks the larger companies with the more dangerous models should be regulated. Smaller companies shouldn't be as heavily regulated. He doesn't want to see them stifled. And basically his position is that we should probably be somewhere between where the US is and where the EU is in terms of how freaked out we are with AI and what kind of regulations we need to have in place. To elaborate on that, the EU, like we talked about last week, is continually putting forth a ton of different regulations. It sounds like it got to a point where Altman had to say that this may not necessarily be possible, and we're going to try to meet this regulation, but if not, then I guess we're just not going to have GPT service in the EU. And so that might end up being a very Italy-like situation where they can just cease operations within that entire area. It sounds like Google was very quick to potentially capitalize on that situation, and I think anyone who's willing to bring in Bard with open arms, Google is going to love that. Switching it up real quick and just talking about a couple of updates on stories that we covered in the last couple of weeks. I did want to touch on real quick what came out about Blizzards. So a couple weeks back, they'd filed a patent for some type of AI art technology. And so we've got a little bit more information now on what they're doing with it. It looks like they're using it to create concept art for their own games, but it seems expandable enough that they're able to actually use it for level design, coding, and even anti-toxicity. So it would seem like machine learning is becoming a very deep part of future Blizzard games. We might see AI anti-cheat, we might see a lot of different things. So they're calling their tool Blizzard Diffusion as a play on Stable Diffusion. And what it looks like is it's going to be able to create autonomous, intelligent in-game NPCs, procedural level design, voice cloning, game coding. So it sounds pretty cool. It sounds interesting. We're going to keep an eye on it. This article does go on to mention that this isn't the first time that Blizzard has tried something involving machine learning, and I guess the previous project was abandoned. So we'll keep an eye on what comes out of the studio, but this actually does seem pretty interesting. And the other update I had, which I guess was just an empty threat from a couple of weeks ago, Samsung was thinking about potentially dropping Google as the prime service provider as far as search on their phones. And it looks like they had a chance to sit down at the table and maybe decide not to do that. While they didn't officially close the door for a future change to something like Bing, they did want to quell fears that this was going to happen or happen anytime soon. The last big subject that I wanted to talk about today is going to be Bing and Microsoft and what they're doing. And for better or worse, you're going to start to see Windows and Bing become more interconnected. It looks like Cortana is going to be a thing of the past, and Bing is going to be replacing Cortana as an AI search bot. Calling this Copilot, I think, was extremely confusing considering they also own GitHub and Copilot with that. But at least this makes sense as a Copilot. You essentially have a little Jarvis inside your computer. And I think the idea would be great if it learned who you were and how to better work with you and made your life easier. The biggest fear I have, and probably a lot of people, is that this becomes a very in-your-face, annoying thing like Bing or Clippy that you just can't get rid of. Bing reminds me of one of those dogs or cats that doesn't wait for you to want to pet them. It just comes to you and kind of rubs itself against you and forces you to pet it. And, you're petting it, whether you like it or not. So everything with Bing and me has been kind of mixed emotions. I feel forced to use it, and how they suddenly appeared as the de facto search provider within ChatGPT is yet another example of that. Now, some people might look at this as a positive, and I'm sure it'll get spun like a positive by Microsoft or potentially even by OpenAI. ChatGPT had just recently unlocked the browsing and the plugins, and I was psyched for a lot of those features. When I went to launch a new GPT-4 session and I saw that the browsing had gotten replaced by Bing, though, I was not happy about that. Because Microsoft benefits from OpenAI, not the other way around. I don't see how Bing can add to the relevancy of that information. I haven't forgotten how irrelevant Bing was just a few months ago. And the only thing that changed was OpenAI's technology. So yeah, personally, I don't feel that that's a feature. They may feel differently. And so as time goes on, what we're seeing each week is that Microsoft and OpenAI are becoming more and more one and the same. And if Microsoft had like a long history of dependable products that were great, that attracted everybody, I'd feel a little bit differently about that. But Microsoft's marketing ideas never give me any kind of autonomy of choice. Things are just there whether I like them or not, and I have to figure out how to uninstall them. If I can push aside the feelings that a lot of this feels forced and that I don't have much of a choice, I think some of the biggest questions and concerns as we get into this world where an AI is looking through your computer to determine how best to help you is, where is this processing being done? Is this being done locally, or is this being done in a cloud of some sort? How much privacy do we have in this future world where your computer is in itself potentially an entity? As we march forward and become more and more dependent each week on new technologies, especially this AI and machine learning based stuff, we have to remember the processing and the power behind it. A lot of it has to be done through big cloud systems and things of that nature. And so that could mean that computers that are not connected to the internet, for example, might get left in the dust. But who's to say AI isn't instrumental in helping us generate new technologies for interconnectedness? And of course, the models that power this stuff, they're only going to get more efficient, faster, better. And who's to say how efficient things will be a year from now or 6 months from now? But one thing looks certain is that we are the pioneers of a very uncertain future right now. And it's definitely not going to be boring. So make sure to subscribe and check out next week's video, and we'll cover what happens next week. Thank you for your likes, your comments, your interactions. It all really, really helps the channel. And I want you to know I really do appreciate your time, especially if you made it to the end of the video. And as always, thanks for watching.